Thursday. Happy Thursday to everyone. If you're on here, get those likes up. Get those likes up. Tag anyone. Share this with someone that you think may find it interesting. Y'all know the drill. I'm excited about today's topic. I think it'll be another fun history lesson for all of us. We're going to be talking about Marcus Garvey and the illegal slave trade. I'll be having on, again, a special guest, a PhD historian, Jahi Issa, as we are continuing our series. It's going to be good. So again, guys, bring out your notepads. Be sure to hit that like button. Also, if you would like to show support to the show, you can do so. Find me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sharday. Also, you can find him on Cash App. Also, feel free to show love and support. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him on and we're going to get started with the conversation. Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Oh, man.
Interesting day.
I'm in Africa, so the Gambia, as I've said, is a challenging country. It's a new country. They were under dictatorship for 22 years. Wasn't a lot of development. Just 5-6 years ago, the dictator was forced out of the country. He ruled the country for 22 years. And so they're developing. It's a developing country. Okay. So, hey, I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a totally different paradigm, I'm sure.
Different paradigm, for sure.
Yeah, well,
how are you doing on the sunny side of California?
I'm sorry?
How are you doing in Cali?
It's been kind of gloomy. I don't like it. I'm ready for the sun again. Like it was a little bit sunny yesterday, and then it started raining in the evening, and then it was raining today. So it's been kind of like a weird week. But I mean, hopefully next week we'll be back to sun. So, but no complaints, for the most part. Hey, Dane C. Shout out to Dane C with the 5 on the super chats. Getting started early. I do appreciate you. I said, hey, Shay, I just watched a YouTube documentary about the life of Marcus Garvey. You should check it out. All right. Well, if you just watch the documentary, you may find this conversation very interesting. So definitely stay tuned. Bring out your notepads. Again, I do appreciate the support. So, so I want to just get right into today's topic. Marcus Garvey and the illegal slave trade. So just to get started with the first question, when did you personally first get introduced to Garvey?
Oh, man. Personally, in elementary and high school. Elementary and high school because, now that that's a good question because now that I remember my first introduction to Garvey, maybe it was in middle school. And in our American history book and global civilization book, and they always had Garvey walking with 3 or 4 European American men in handcuffs. He had an overall, he had a big, I forgot those long coats. He had his hat on and he was in handcuffs.
Okay.
Right. And that's my earliest remembrance of or influence to Garvey. I'll never forget that picture, that image. And I would always say, why did they have this man? What did he do wrong? They got him in the books. He must have done something wrong, but he was in the U.S. history books. So I'm like, I always wondered, why is he in here in handcuffs if he, why put him in here, And so that was my earliest. And then, of course, when I went to undergrad, I studied a little Garvey, not much, just basic stuff, what the professor had us to read. And I was probably pissed off because I was, I didn't know much back then. And then,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It looks like they're saying your connection sounds a little spotty. I don't know if you maybe want to hop out and then hop back in and see if that corrects it. I know we've had this issue in the past sometimes where it'll be clear and then all of a sudden it'll kind of clear out, but they're saying you're a bit choppy. So I just want to make sure all that you're saying we can hear.
Let me hop off and come back in.
Okay. All right, guys. All right, guys, a little technical issues. Y'all know what I say. If there's not a little bit of struggle, then it's not a good stream. So I guess we're right on track. We are right on track. Okay, so you say you can understand. Okay, so hopefully, when he comes back in, that'll help with the internet. That's that's the only thing about doing these live streams. Sometimes you don't ever really know. You can do the best you can to promote, but sometimes the stuff is a little bit out of our control. So we're just going to wait really briefly. And then let him come back. So he'll be back any moment, guys. In the meantime, like I said, get those likes up, likes. Also, you can feel free to show support to the show, and make sure to bring your notepads and your questions if you have any. Struggle streaming already. I believe one of these days I'm going to get out of the struggle stream, but until then, you got to embrace the process. Got to embrace the process, y'all. I will say honestly, y'all, I didn't understand why I didn't really fully understand why people had like producers, video producers, people in the background. I just didn't understand it until I started like actually live streaming myself, and then I'm like, man, this makes so much sense. You really do need people back there making sure your connection's right, making sure you look right, things are out of place, visually, audio's good. Like there really is so much that goes into just a little simple stream. I mean, we can do our best to just. Some of us smaller pages, we do our best to try to bring you guys a clear connection. But when you really want to start to grow things, like it does really takes a group effort for sure to try to do something as simple as just like having a clear, good video for you to hear. So, like I said, y'all bear with me. I appreciate it. Let's see. All right, so he's coming back. Yeah, true. No, it's a real thing. It's funny too, because for those of you guys who didn't know, like I did digital marketing for about 7-8 years in corporate before I decided to kind of like branch off. And it's completely different doing social media, digital marketing. It's so different doing that for a corporate setting than it is trying to do it for yourself, or than it is just doing it, without all those guidelines and rules. It's a totally different thing. So even though I had that background and that experience and knowing how to navigate in those places, doing it this way and a little bit more organic, it's a completely different learning curve. Okay, looks like we got him back on. Okay, so you look a lot clearer, that's for sure. The video looks clearer. So that's okay. So hopefully this works, and we'll try it again. So again, guys, thanks for those of you who are joining on. Get those likes up as you're coming in. And we can maybe just revisit the last question briefly. Just you were talking a little bit about like when you were introduced to just Marcus Garvey, and so you were talking briefly about you saw him in some pictures being handcuffed, and then to me that's something that started getting a little choppy.
Yeah, that was the earliest that I can remember. Then when I was in graduate school at Southern University in Baton Rouge, I was working on my master's thesis, and I was looking for a topic. And I had a friend, a medical doctor who was the senior medical doctor for the school, told me that I should really look at the Garvey movement in Louisiana, and that it was the largest in the world. And at that time, I didn't really know a whole lot about Garvey. So I picked up a few books on Garvey. One of those books were Toni Martin's Race First. I think I have that book somewhere around here. I just had it. Toni Martin's Race First. And then in that book, it's probably the best book written on Garvey. And as far as an overall general book, an introduction book, for those who want to study Garvey. And after I looked at that, I looked at the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And after reading that, I was basically in tears because the first 20 pages, it just resonated with me and what he had to say. I'm this young Black man in the American South in Louisiana, not realizing at the time that Louisiana had more branches than any nation in the world.
Now, according to Toni Martin, Louisiana had something like 76 branches. But in my doctoral dissertation and upcoming almost completed manuscript on the Garvey movement in Louisiana, I've shown that it had more than 100 branches. And globally, Toni Martin said that the UNIA had in his appendix, and at the end of the book, he said there were 1,200 branches globally. But he was just using the membership cards that were found that are now at the Schomburg Center in New York, Schomburg Center on African American Research. And Arthur Schomburg was a bibliophile, and he collected books on the Black world from 1910 up until he died, and they named the library after him.
Okay.
And he was an Afro-Puerto Rican, I think. Was he Puerto Rican? I think he was. So they named the library after him, and so they have one of the largest repositories of the Garvey movement. And so that's really my introduction. And when I found out Garland was one of the largest branches in the world, I really delved into it and wrote my master's thesis on it. And then I was looking for a PhD program to enter, and I wanted to study Garvey. And the best Garvey scholar was a man by the name of Emory Tobert at the time. He was the general editor of the first 4 volumes of the Marcus Garvey papers. Now, the Marcus Garvey papers, you can go Google them. They're edited by Robert Hill, but Emory Tobert, who was the chair of the history department at Howard University at that time, was the general editor of the Garvey. No, he was the senior editor of the Garvey, the first 4 volumes of the Garvey papers. And there are more than 15 volumes now. Each volume is more than 1,000 pages of primary sources. Right? So the Garvey papers is one of the most complete, one of the largest collection of Black global political thought. Right? One of the largest collections and studies of an organization in the African world, the Garvey papers. And so, and it's funny because you have a lot of people who say a lot of misconstrued or misinformation about Garvey, and I always ask them, so who do you like? And they'll say, well, I like this person, I like that person. I say, well, why don't we have 16, 17 volumes on that person? This is why this man was so important. So I wrote my PhD thesis dissertation on the Garvey movement in Louisiana, and I'm completing the manuscript. I have to go hunt for a few more sources, and that's my introduction and my understanding.
Okay, it's interesting. You said your first introduction to him was somewhat almost painted as like a fugitive or as a criminal. And then
he was arrested, and they were marching. I think he was after his trial. The United States government accused him of mail fraud, and after his trial, they marched him to penitentiary in Atlanta, and so that's what the handcuffs are. He's on his way to the penitentiary, and they wanted the world to see. So the question is, why would they put these handcuffs on a man and beam that image all over the world? What did he do, really? And what he really did is organize the Black world's largest political movement. There hasn't been anything like it since then. And we are all, every African nation, every Caribbean nation, every Black nation in South America, are all living off the energy and the legacy of Marcus Mosiah Garvey to this day. The entire Black world owes this man. One man came in and sparked a fire in Black people, in which that fire has yet to be taken off. One man, just one man with a program a belief in himself, one human being. And he made his contribution to humanity and moved on to the heavens, to the spiritual world.
Wow, interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. And you know, like I said, I guess I could be honest and say when I first heard of Garvey, it was very, I guess it was you know, it's one of those things, at least for me, when you, depending on where you hear it, whether it's like in school or education, it's usually very, very what's the word? It's like a very shallow description, and then it's usually like, oh, well, he was just a fugitive, or he was just a bad guy anyway, so it's not that important, and then you just kind of move on. You know what I mean? And so those are,
Yes.
I guess, my earliest introductions to him was, oh, well, yeah, he just did stuff, but he was like a bad guy, so it's not that important, or you know, like very, very much, I guess, undermining or downplaying what actually was going on and how he was actually really reviewed and respected, you know, by many people in this time. Also hated, of course, but yeah, it's just not like a full, depending upon, I guess, the sources or where you go, you don't always get the full understanding of it. So again, shout out to Deanie with the 5 on the super sticker. I appreciate it. Guys, if you're on here, put those likes up. Put those likes up. Yeah, see, Marcus Garvey is a controversial figure, most definitely. And that's why, you know, what you've said this multiple times, why it really is important for us to do our own research and to do our own deep dive when we're coming to a conclusion and not just take somebody else's word for it. Because if you'd have just taken, you know, if you'd have just stopped where the picture that you saw of him being a fugitive, then if you just stopped there, that could have completely changed how, you know, how you would have maybe moving forward.
You know, and let me add, remember, you know, I'm 53, so we're talking about, shit, when was this? The 1980s, you know, 80s, right? And so we're talking about the 1980s, the 1980s. So since then, right? Since then, there have been a plethora of books written on Garvey, not just the Garvey papers, right? And, you know, I've named a few books. I named Toni Martin's Race First. I recommend that highly. I would also say for local studies, if you can get a hold of my doctoral dissertation, The Garvey Movement in Louisiana, Jahi Issa. And then there's another local study by a man by the former chair of the history department at Howard University. His name is Emory Tolbert. His book is called The UNIA and Black Los Angeles, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. That is the acronym, and Black Los Angeles. It's the only study on on the state of California. There's been a few other books. There's a not very good biography written by a Jamaican intellectual named Colin Grant. It's called Negro with a Hat. It's the best biography out there. It was written about 10 years ago, I believe. And then there's another book that came out and won all type of awards by a European American by the name of Adam Ewing. Adam Ewing. Adam Ewing is called The Age of Garvey, how a Jamaican activist created a mass movement and changed global Black politics forever. Right? And that book was put out by Princeton University Press.
Okay.
Right? And so, and then one more book that I would recommend is by another European American. Her name is Mary Rollison. It's called Grassroots Garveyism. And it's the first study of the Garvey movement in the South, because most people think that the Garvey movement was primarily a Northern movement, and it wasn't. And they're looking at these old European scholars like David Cronin and people like that who made pretty much a mockery of Garvey. You know, because they were trying to, I mean, in many ways, they had to make this man out to be something that he wasn't, so that it wouldn't influence other Black people.
Okay.
Right. And so those books, if you start off with those books, I think he'll be fine. Those were people who really, really, really want to get to know Garvey.
Okay, no, great references and resources. Okay, so on to the next question, guys. Again, if you're on here, get those likes up. Get those likes up. So, okay, why did so many Black people join the UNIA, and how many members were there in the UNIA?
Okay, why did so many look? And that's really the basis of the title of our conversation today, and that is Marcus Garvey and the illegal slave trade. I believe we're talking about the 1920s. One, we're talking about right after the end of World War I, where there were a lot of Black soldiers from the United States, from the Caribbean, even from Africa. You know, for the first time, they were able to go and fight in a global war where Europeans were fighting and hurting each other. And some of them had action. They saw action. They were able to kill. You know, can you imagine somebody from the South in a uniform, and you know, maybe he watched. He was his ancestors were brought into slavery, and he watched his grandfather be lynched or whipped to death, or his mother being raped by the KKK. He's in the military over in Europe, and he's shooting at white people in Europe.
That's crazy.
Right? I mean, this is what's going on. And so these men are coming home with this military training, and they come back into the United States, particularly the United States, because although the Garvey movement started in Jamaica, it really didn't have its thrust until Garvey moved the central headquarters to Jamaica. And so when we say how many people, why so many people join, also I'm looking at a period of the illegal slave trade where possibly millions of Africans were brought into the southern part of the United States,
right,
during a period where they weren't supposed to be brought into the United States, from 1808 until 1965 primarily, although Africans were brought in even after that period.
Right.
And so I think one of the reasons was the timing. I mean, this is the age of nationalism where all of these countries are now fighting, they're at war, and many of them are requesting their independence. So you have the provisional government of Korea. They're requesting their independence. The IRA, the Irish Republic, the Irish, right? They're requesting their independence at this time. So this is the age of nationalism. And all of these countries are asking for their independence from their former colonial masters. And so Garvey comes right in at this time period. All of these soldiers, Black soldiers who were for the most part highly trained in modern warfare, coupled with the fact that their parents, in some cases, but more than likely their grandparents whom they may have known, right, were African born, particularly in the South, and most definitely this is the case in some parts of the Caribbean too, West Indies. Can you hear me?
Sorry, dude. I'm talking. You can. I think I hit the mute button. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry. No, yeah, I can hear you. I think I actually hit the mute button. But yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, just, you know, even when I think about those experiences and what was going on, and trying to put myself, like, literally trying to put myself in a situation where, you know, you would mention if you're seeing your parent or your grandparent, or God forbid your sister or your aunt, being like literally being attacked, being abused, like these very, very blatant things that you can't overlook. And how that you just like I try to think myself, putting myself in that place emotionally, like the tension, looking for a way to organize and needing a way to try to survive. And just understanding that key component to me makes so much sense, why there would really be a need and a drive for people to try to, work together. So, hey, Chantel. Hey, Chantel, we got Chantel in the building, a fellow pick me. Lovely Jamaican woman here. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah. But yeah, no, like I said, what you said, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense when you just kind of break down and understand all that was going on around that time. Are you able to hear me now? Am I coming clear? I know I was cutting out for a bit.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So, just what was the global impact of the UNIA, and how did the organization impact anti-colonial movements in Africa?
How did the organization have anti-what?
Colonial just movements. Like, how did it impact anti-colonial movements just across the diaspora? Really?
Well, the impact, like I said, every African nation, almost every Black political organization in the United States at that time, including the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, this is the Garvey movement.
Mm-hmm.
There is no Harlem Renaissance without the Garvey movement. Right? For instance, when in 1918, when Marcus Garvey moves the organization from Jamaica to the United States, the NAACP at this time is the largest Black organization in the United States. I think it has something like 21,000 members, right? By 1920, the UNIA had eclipsed that number by 1 million. Right? That's the impact. Right? Wow. It's not just New York, it's not just Northern people. These are Southern people, just in the United States. Most of the branches of the more than, I think there were close to 1,800 branches. Most of those branches, over half of them were in the American South. Right?
Right.
When we talk about large branches outside of the United States, we look at Jamaica, we're talking about over 50 branches. We look at Liberia, there were over 30 branches. And I can go on. And there were branches in Australia. Can you imagine?
Wow.
There were Garvey branches in Australia.
Wow.
All the way under. In Brazil, there was a Garvey branch. There were a few Garvey branches. We just had I wouldn't say just. This is about 6 years ago. We had a global Garvey conference. It was the second conference of its kind on all scholars who studied Garvey. We had people that came from all over the world, from Australia, from the islands, from the Caribbean, of course, from the United States. It was in Virginia, at a university in Virginia, from Europe. Of course, we had scholars come in from Africa, right? All scholars intellectuals who study Garvey. And there was a book that just came out on global Garvey. It's called Global Garveyism, edited by Adam Ewings. He's a European American. I talked about his other book on Garvey. And so the impact that Garvey had on the Black world was tremendous. It almost single-handedly ended colonialism. And one of the reasons was, a lot of people say it was a back to Africa movement, right? It was, in a sense. But Dr. John Henry Clark would often say in his book, Garvey came to remind Black people that in Africa, before slavery and colonialism, they once ruled themselves. They once ruled their own states. And so obviously in the 1920s, you're dealing with a group of Black people who have a sincere memory of this. And of course,
well, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and of course in the United States it's important because these Blacks have more resources than any other group of Blacks in the world. And so they are the ones who are, for the most part, funding the Garvey movement, these Blacks in the U.S. So the impact was tremendous. You know, when we talk about people like Kwame Nkrumah, Nkrumah said that, you know, there's no Nkrumah without Garvey. We talk about Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of modern Ghana. Jomo Kenyatta, the founder of Kenya. These were all Garveyites. We talk about Amilcar Cabral, his parents, the founder of Guinea-Bissau. His parents were Garveyites all over Africa, in Cameroon, in South Africa. In fact, there's a book by a scholar, a good friend of mine, who went to Howard together. It's been out for a decade or so. It's a book on the Garvey movement in South Africa. His name is Robert Trent Vincent. He's a professor at William and Mary University in Virginia. It's a book out on the Garvey movement in South Africa. Right? So this is the impact, you know. The impact was tremendous.
Right? No, absolutely. Well, you know, and it's so interesting. So, you know, with that, what you mentioned is how he was able to find, I guess, you know, however you put it, there's international unity, international organization. And this goes really largely against what I see today, which is a lot of times tribalism, and finding ways for you to say, oh, you're Jamaican, you don't identify with me because I'm a Black American, or you're from Senegal, you don't identify with me, which I see. I don't know if this is more of like an online thing, but you know, I've noticed that especially over the last few months, how there's like tribalism, like it's like the exact opposite of like finding reasons to divide and kind of separate and not you know, want to work together. So it's interesting how you're talking about there was this common thread that people, you know, Caribbean, obviously United States, you mentioned Australia, Africa, you know, like it's just they're all in different places, but there is this common, I guess, thread of unity that they felt, and obviously largely probably because many of them had parents or even grandparents that they could trace back to Africa or trace back to a certain point that felt like home, felt familiar. So I don't know, I find that really interesting. Again, guys, if you're on here, get those likes up. I see. Okay, it's not an online thing; it's very real. Yeah. So you're talking about what I mentioned, the tribalism, is that there is very much a divide that I see, an ethnic divide that I just don't know. I personally, as one who's you know, traveled and had a chance to be around different cultures, I don't really see the benefit of that. Like, I think there's a way you can respect and honor people's unique differences and not necessarily use it as a way to have to try to create dissension. But I don't want to get too much on a tangent.
Yeah, let me. The book by Robert Trent Vincent on the Garvey movement in South Africa. There's no Mandela without Marcus Garvey, right? Because the foundation of the African National Congress is all based on UNIA members who are in South Africa. And it's also based on Caribbean and African Americans who are dock ship workers who are bringing in the Marcus Garvey's, the UNIA's newspaper into South Africa. So the name of that book is called The Americans Are Coming, Dreams of African American Liberation in Segregationist South Africa.
Wow.
It came out a decade ago, right? South Africa. So there is no Kenya, there is no Senegal, there is no Ghana, there is no Nigeria. The first president of Nigeria, Zikwe, right? He was a Garveyite member. So, you know, this is what shapes the colonial, anti-colonial movement is Garvey and his writings. You know, Garvey lived into to the brink of World War I. And even when he was arrested, put in jail, and subsequently deported out of the United States back to his native land of Jamaica, he continued to write. He continued to address the issues of African redemption. And just that concept of African redemption, redeeming Africa, reclaiming Africa. I mean, when you look at the Marcus Garvey's newspaper, it was called The Negro World. They had a circulation of 50,000 newspapers per week in the 1920s.
Wow.
Which was public, and it was translated in Spanish, and some of them were also translated in French. Right? And so this was the largest circulating newspaper in the Black world for Black people. It was a global newspaper. And so he had an impact. I mean, the ideal of Black people, you know, particularly, let's say if your grandmother was born in 1840, born in Africa in 1840, brought to the United States 1850 at the age of 10. A 10-year-old has a pretty good memory of what her or his experiences were in Africa, because a lot of the enslaved Africans that were coming into the United States and the Caribbean were children. They were teenagers and younger, almost 50% of them.
Yeah.
And so let's say you brought in at the age of 10, you're a slave until the American Civil War. You're 20 years old now, 30 years old. What are you going to tell your children? Right? Let's say, you know, by the age of 30, 1860, you're 30 years old. You have 3 or 4 children. 1860.
Yeah.
These are African children of somebody that's born in Africa. She's talking to them about her experiences in Africa.
Yep.
And let's just imagine that this lady has grandchildren who are born in the 1880s. She lives to 1910. She's 80 and 90 in 1910. And she got grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These are the children who will join the Garvey movement. Do you understand?
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Again, because there was still such a close connection and understanding and remembrance. So it makes total sense. I did see one comment I wanted to see if you wanted to touch upon, where it said Garvey was pro-Africa, but spent his time. No, let me see if I can find it. I thought it was interesting because I've heard this. Oh yeah, it says Garvey was pro-African, but never set foot in Africa. Bypassed it for Europe. What do you have to say with that? Because I've heard that idea a lot. Like he was pro this, but never made it there. So I don't know if you wanted to touch upon that.
I'm trying to readjust my thing. Okay. Yeah, Garvey never stepped foot in Africa because he was denied that opportunity. The colonial governors, Britain, France, and other colonial powers, Belgium, where the Garvey newspaper, the Negro World, was circulating in. If you got caught with a Negro World newspaper in South Africa, you could be killed.
Yeah, I heard. I heard that.
Caught, and I mean, you could be killed if you were caught with a Negro World newspaper in Cameroon, in Nigeria. You can be killed or imprisoned. Right? Those papers were banned. And so the last thing they wanted was Marcus Garvey literally coming back. Now, Garvey had an African redemption program where they made contract with where they made contract with the government of Liberia, who was under receivership to debtors, European debtors. And Garvey approached them. He sent ambassadors to Liberia, 2 of them, and they worked out a deal where they would take on the debt, pay off that debt back to the colonial masters for the UNIA to have a headquarters and a footing in Africa. At this time, the UNIA is a provisional government. And so what the question is, what is a provisional government? A provisional government is an organization, it's a state that another state recognizes. So when we look at what's going on in Iraq right now, they are bombing, the Turkish are bombing this ethnic minority. And let's say even with the Ukraine, let's say Russia conquers the Ukraine, what would happen to that government? That government can relocate to the United States or to another country, and that country will grant that government a provisional status. A prime example of that is the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, his article Tibet is in China, present-day China. They were a small kingdom nation state. They were conquered by the larger ethnic groups of China. And the government of Tibet had to they fought a civil war, and they had to relocate to where? India. They are granted provisional government status by India. So this is the same case with Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. They're granted provisional status, government status in Liberia with the intention of bringing modern technology, modern equipment, which they shipped a lot of equipment over to Liberia, so that Liberia will be the headquarters for a new Africa. And the colonial powers didn't want this. And this is why they denied Garvey the opportunity to return to Africa. It's not that he didn't want to, right? But the colonial powers denied him. Not just him, during the 1922 League of Nations. The League of Nations was an organization that was set up by after World War II, where all the warring parties came together, particularly after Germany lost, and they decided, okay, this is what we're going to do with all the German land. And so the UNIA, Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, they sent a group of them. They tried to send several ambassadors over to the League of Nations, and they weren't able to do so because many of the African Americans were denied passports to go. America did not want them going over talking about racial issues, and particularly talking about Black people in the South who were stuck on these plantations, leaving the South and going back and building a nation state in Africa. So these are the issues that we're looking at, So it's not that Garvey couldn't go to Africa; he was prevented. Africa is at this time is under the thrust of the colonial European governments.
It's very interesting, and it's funny because well, not funny, but you think about how earlier it's like they were trying to ship some of us back, right? And then now you got to the point where some were actively wanting to go and they denied it, but it's largely because of the intent and not wanting to prevent any possibility of people actually working together. And
Well, let me add to that. One of the reasons why they were shipping Black people back, particularly the those Blacks who were free, they called them troublemakers because they were advocating for the end of slavery. And they were also funding churches like the AME Church, the AME Zion Church. They were literally in the independent African churches in the United States. They were literally funding armed resistance movements to end slavery in the United States. And so also you had the issue of 1808 and the impact of 1808, the illegal slave trade, which said that any African who was captured illegally, they were caught on a slave ship by Europeans and brought on their way to the U.S., the U.S. had to send them back to Africa, right? They had to by law. And this is really how Liberia is set up. A lot of people don't know this. This is how Liberia is set up. It's due to the illegal slave trade. So when we get like the Einstein case, I know a lot of guys saw that movie. This is really about the illegal slave trade. Were these people captured illegally and brought into U.S. territory? Yes, they were. But they never mentioned illegal slave trade, right? And so, of course, this is the topic of the lecture on May the 3rd. It's the illegal slave trade, the only real way you can get reparations. And I want to add really quickly now that I think next week we should do a lecture on the history of the reparations movement, so we understand the origins of this movement, right? I used to be a member of NCOBRA. I knew the founder of NCOBRA.
Oh, yeah.
Mario Baddelli. Yes, I have pictures with him.
Okay.
I have pictures with me, a young Dr. Issa, a teenager. And I'm running around with the president of NCOBRA. Right? So, and I knew a lot of those older members, Hannibal Africa. I knew these people.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. That'll be interesting. So tune in next week, guys, if you're interested in that. Guys, for those of you who are joining in, get those likes up. Show support to the show on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sade. You can also send in some super chats. Super chats are open. Also, you can find Dr. Issa on Cash App and show some love and support there. And on to the next question. Okay, so what do you think of the claim that Garvey promoted a Christian Masonic colonialization of Africa?
They said what? Garvey did what?
That he promoted a Christian Masonic colonialization of Africa. That is to say,
yes, Marcus Garvey, as with many of the 19th and 20th century leaders, they are impacted by their colonial masters. No different than I mean, when I hear people make that argument, right? It's funny because they're not making this argument in Wolof. They're not making this argument in Tree, which is the language of Ghana. Wolof is the language of Senegambia in the Gambia and Senegal and Guinea. They're not making that argument. The reason why they're not making that argument in any African language is because the very reason that they are speaking English is the same reason why Marcus Mosiah Garvey was a Christian. It had everything to do with slavery and African people being conquered. But at least they were trying to deal with historically with what happened to them. You can't blame these people no more than no one can blame me and you for speaking English. We're only speaking English because of a historical event that happened in 1591.
Yeah.
That is why we are speaking English. And that is why Garvey and my mother and my grandmother were Christians. Yes, Marcus Mosiah Garvey was a Masonic. He was encouraged to join the Black Masonic Order because 90% of Black leaders in the country were members of the Masons, Prince Hall Masons. And once he joined that organization, he was really able to galvanize Black people in the United States and eventually in the Caribbean. And that's what gave the UNIA this thrust. It was the Masonic Order. But these are not the Masonic orders, and these are not the same black people as today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are not the same black people.
Right.
These people back then, they were fighting. This is why the first thing I did for those who are serious, who really want to know, which I don't know if we have a lot of sick people who are really interested in knowing our history, because they will read a lot more. You cannot, you know, they like to talk about people like Dubois. Oh, Dubois was a sellout, right? There was a time and period where I didn't know much. There was a time and a period where you didn't know much. Malcolm X, you never hear them talk about Malcolm, but Malcolm X, for the early part of his life, he was a drug dealer, a pimp, a hustler. Went to prison, got caught stealing. He loved white women. Do we hold Malcolm in that historical void? No. We deal with Malcolm where we met him. Most of us know Malcolm when he made the decision to join the Nation of Islam and be a leader for black people who were subsequently brought, forced into the Americas. Yes, so Garvey was a Masonic, he was a Christian, right? But the UNIA was in the process of Africanizing and bringing Christianity back to its original source. Mm-hmm. They started a Christian church called the African Orthodox Church, where they revealed that Jesus Christ was the Messiah, the Black Messiah. And they're starting to deal with African culture, move out of this influence of Western Judaic Christianity. They were moving out of that. Mm-hmm. But the movement was captured. All of the colonial powers forced the United States to do something about this man, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So the organizations really never developed, although his church is still there in some of the southern states, the African Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm.
Right, right.
So what does that have to do with a nation? What does that have to do? I want you to put up that slide. I don't know if our moderator was able to make a PDF of that one red slide.
Let me see. I think I can pull it up. Let me see.
Ethiopia is a Christian nation. Ethiopia is the oldest Christian nation. The Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the only African nation. Not that one.
Oh, not that one. Oh,
it's a red one. That's Philosophies and Opinions. Now, with this book, I would highly recommend that everybody read. It's an online book. Read the first 30 pages of it. Very powerful. Read it. I was in tears when I first read it. There's another one I sent the moderator. It's a red picture.
Okay.
And it's a quote of Garvey.
Oh, it's the quote. Okay, this is the one. I don't know if I have. Let me see. Let me see if there's a way I can. Okay, so I don't have it in P. Do you? Let me see. Give me 1 second. So I have it, but I'm not able to share it just because of the format. I can read because it looks like there's a quote. I can read the quote.
Okay.
If that helps, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share that one right now just because of the format it's in. I'm kind of limited.
Well, this one, the Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, was edited by his second wife, Amy Jacques Garvey. Mm-hmm. And it's a compilation of many of his articles that he wrote right before he went to prison. And this is the book that most African leadership read. Even there's a very famous picture. You don't see much of it. I want people to just Google Martin Luther King at the cemetery of Marcus Garvey and tell me what you find. You'll see an image of Dr. King in Jamaica at the tomb of Marcus Garvey. You don't hear people talking about that. MLK.
Interesting. Okay. So do you want me to read? I can read the quote, or how would you?
Yeah, read the quote. Read the quote.
So this is the quote you're referring to. It says, "No race is free until it has a strong nation of its own system of government, and its own order of society. Never give up this idea. Let no one persuade you against it. It is the only protection of your generation and your race. Hold on to the idea of an independent government and nation so long as other men have them. Never be satisfied to always live under the government and other people, because you shall ever be at their mercy." Mosiah Garvey.
Yeah. So what does this have to do? This is a period where there are only 3 African governments in the world. The oldest is Ethiopia. Ethiopia, 1920, is coming off the thrust of Emperor Emperor Menelik, who defeats the Italians with the help of the Russians. With the help of the Russians, he defeats the Italians. And then you have the next government is Haiti, who comes into existence after the defeat of all of the European powers, including the United States, France, Spain, England. They defeated them all and set up a government. And that government went around the African diaspora, freeing Black people all over the place. The Haitians did. They sent their agents everywhere, starting armed resistance movements in the United States and other parts of the Caribbean. And then the last of those, the next of the 3 is the country of Liberia. After that, there were no governments. Every other African territory that had an African majority was under colonial rule. And here Garvey comes saying, no, not only are we going to free Africa, Black people who were taken away are going to come back and redeem themselves by modernizing Africa. And Garvey would often say a strong Africa means a strong Black man everywhere. So you asked the question of how many members were there of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Some people say as few as 300,000-400,000, and as many as 10 million. I think it's somewhere in the middle. 4 to 5 million. Garvey would often claim he represented all 400 million Black people. Can you imagine you have that cross the barrier, that that you are here to resurrect the Black race? For us in the Caribbean, in the United States, we're just out of slavery. And here you're saying you single-handedly have been born and brought into this earth to give Black back their dignity by helping them to organize a powerful nation state in Africa that will protect the interests of all Black people around the world. Can you imagine what would happen to a Chinese person in the Bay Area? Do you think the KKK would attack a Chinese person in the Bay Area without the Chinese government getting involved?
No.
Do you think the police can come, shoot Chinese man in the back of the head from running away from a racist police officer, right? So, without the Chinese women getting involved? No, these things happen to Black people because they have weak states.
That makes
But
sense.
the only reason why we have states is because of Garvey. Without Garvey, there is no African states. Period.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Real quick, I want to give a special shout out to, I just saw some super chat come through from W.E.B. It says, I love the research you've done. Refreshing to know you do your homework. Shout out to W.E.B. Much appreciated for the love and support. Also, shout out to Daniel Davidson. I see for the 10 on the super chat. Looks like there's a website he referenced. It says, Stop the harm is the first step to repairing the damage. Look forward to the talk on reparations. Love you, brother and sister. Great discussion. I do appreciate the love and support. Much appreciated.
Please go on and sign up today, please.
I'm sorry. What? I'm sorry. You were one more time. You cut out for a second.
No, I said they should please go and sign up for the lecture.
Yes, absolutely, guys. Sign up for the lecture. And if you haven't already, want to do a little quick commercial break. If you haven't already seen the lecture, I'm gonna or heard about it, I'm gonna play a quick commercial break for you guys to find out more about it. Definitely sign up and check it out. So here we go, and then I will continue with the questions.
Aboriginal people on this land were simply reclassified as black. So we've been here. This is our homeland.
The tens of millions of black Americans, or rather Indians, who disappeared in 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within America. Hundreds of thousands were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. The whole slave trade story was given to all of us in reverse.
People like Dane Calloway and Tariq Nasheed have great content, but their narrative is ahistorical and woefully misleading. They understand very little about our history.
So again, guys, definitely check it out. Check it out if you're interested. It's going to be a lot of information dropped there. So, and guys, if you're just joining on, get those likes up for sure. So on to the next question. So I think you kind of touched upon this, but for those who are joining on, maybe we can briefly revisit it. Were the mail fraud claims against Garvey legitimate?
No, they were not. And if you want to do some reading for yourself, you may want to buy the second edition volume of the Marcus of the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. Even look at Colin Powell's biography on it. Toni Martin does a great job on that subject also as well. So no, they were not legitimate charges. The charges were trumped up, essentially to they had to find a way to stop this movement. Yeah. Europe needed Africa after World War II. How was it going to rebuild? Where was it going to get its raw material from? Europe was decimated. It was decimated. Where are they going to get their raw materials from? And the last thing they needed was this organization of several million, with its base in America, with the most technological advanced group of black people in the African world, and the most conscious group of black people in the African world, under British subjugation, going back to Africa, and the most military trained, because you had thousands who were trained right after World War I, going back to Africa and modernizing Africa and retaking Africa from European rule. Where are they going to get their resources from, the natural resources, if Garvey does this?
Fair. I mean, to this, to this day, I know the modern world really depends upon the resources that come from that place. So, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I know, and I know his wife, if I'm not mistaken, she had kind of written a whole book about this, kind of talking about how it was fraudulent, from my understanding. And then that, I think that didn't the government even like admit to it later on? They're like, yeah, we made it up. So let me see.
Yeah, I mean, it was all fraudulent. They were all trumped up charges. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Because, like I started off earlier, some people come into this world with a destiny. They fulfill that destiny and they move on.
Yeah, that's true.
Garvey said when he was in prison, he said, look for me in a whirlwind or a storm. I mean, come on, who talks like that? Only somebody who's coming in a form of divine kingship as a messianic savior. Right? Who talks like that? This man, like I said, one man came and changed the world. And the Black world is still living off of his energy to this day. Malcolm X's mother and father were members of the Garvey movement. Elijah Muhammad was a member of the Garvey movement.
Yeah.
So we can go on and on and on and on. And people can say what they want to say, but until whoever you're claiming is better than Garvey or whatever can produce a body of work that has been studied on him like Garvey, there's really no comparison. And I think we still need to study Garvey today. We still don't understand him.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, sorry about that. There was a brief disconnect there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud.
Okay, sorry. I was having a bit of a technical issue. Let me see. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Anyways, again, guys, if you're here, get those likes up. Get those likes up for sure. Super chats are open. I'll be sure to acknowledge all super chats. We've been having a good conversation. For those of you who are just hopping on, we've been having a good conversation with Dr. Jahi Issa just about Marcus Garvey, the illegal slave trade, just the different impact that he's made and how he has helped to just make an impact to this day that is continuing to change things. So just for those who want to learn more about Garvey and the UNIA, what are the different ways that you recommend? I know you had already shared different resources, different ways, things that people can look out. But how can someone learn more about what he's done, the UNIA? What's the best way that you recommend going about doing that?
Do you see this?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the best books written on the subject.
Okay.
Right here. You want to learn about it? Do some reading. There's no substitute for reading. There's no substitute for reading.
Mm-hmm.
Not watching videos, because reading is a spell. The word spell is really that. It is really that. Okay? Reading is a spell. So there's no substitute for reading those words.
Mm-hmm.
You have to discipline yourself. I gave a plethora of books. I gave about 10 books.
Mm-hmm.
But people want to be entertained. They don't really want to do no work. They want, this is what YouTube is about. They want to, they want to see drama and all of this other
stuff.
That's
true.
When it comes to the real work, where they want to promote drama to produce their numbers on YouTube. When we talk about reading and studying, and then what do you do once you've read? But let's deal with the basis. Let's just start off with Race First by Toni Martin. So get that book. It's affordable, and start right there.
Okay. All right, so let's add in that. I know you guys, there's been multiple resources that he's given. So if you want to learn more about it, you can go back and catch the replay. He's dropped a lot of different resources for you to check out. So this has been, I guess, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, looks like it went black for a second. But yeah, those are all the questions that I have. So this has been, like I said, a very informative, another informative discussion. Do you have any, final thoughts or last things that you would like to leave with the audience before we wrap things up?
Well, let's see if we have any more questions. Give them another second.
Okay. So you want to see if anybody has any questions. Let's see. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, we have a few brief minutes. I want to be mindful of time, but we have a few brief minutes, so feel free to drop it in the comment section or call in. You guys know the call-in rules. Keep it short, sweet, respectful. No name calling, no rants. We have a few minutes, so feel free to do so. So here's one. Did you hear the meeting of Garvey and Selassie? Did that happen?
Did I hear what?
Can you hear me? Is it choppy? I have it up too.
Did I hear of a meeting between Marcus Garvey and Haile Selassie?
Mm-hmm.
No,
did that happen?
There was a meeting. I do know during the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was ran out of Ethiopia and ended up in England for some time, where Garvey was. And Garvey wrote numerous of essays and articles criticizing Haile Selassie for leaving his people. I believe there was a brief meeting, but I don't recall what that meeting was about.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Okay, I'm just waiting a few minutes. Also, guys, while we're waiting, like I said, be sure to check out the link and sign up for the lecture happening May 3rd.
Yeah, and so as I was saying, and I always say this, myself and Brother Reggie Marbury, we are the ones who really brought to global attention this issue of the illegal slave trade. And I really think that the only way that you're going to understand Garvey is by understanding the illegal slave trade. So this upcoming meeting that we're going to have on the 20th of next month, this pay-per-view meeting will be a overview of the illegal slave trade. It'll be a one-on-one class, a lot of the material that you can get online, but I'm going to help you to connect some dots and what this really means and why it is important. This is why it's important that we have people sign up right now, today. What incentives can we give people to sign up?
I'm sorry, you cut out the last thing you said. You cut out.
I said this is why it's important that people sign up for the lecture today.
Oh yeah, guys. If you haven't already, sign up for the lecture. It's only $10, but you'll get a ton of information, a ton of resources. So definitely do so if you haven't already. You can find the link there. I see another question here. What's the first thing Black people should do to get organized?
That's a very good question. First, we have to admit that there are issues, and we are organized. We have organizations. Some of them are not really working to the best interest for Black people for various reasons. Some of them are not the reasons of them. For some of the problems are not the problems of their own. They're coming from other spaces. So we have organizations. I don't agree with everything that Tariq Nasheed says, but he has organized tens of thousands of Black people. We have organizations, right? We just need these organizations to meet and to collectively decide which way they're going to go. But more importantly, within the organization, we need organizational rank and file that's going to be educated, that are willing to do the work. The rank and file, they must be willing to do the work. And part of that work is just reading and studying. That's very important.
Right. No, that makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. I'm going to see if there's any other questions. How many Africans do you believe Europeans were able to bring to the Americas? Roughly, of course, is a question.
Is it how many Africans did Europeans bring to the United States when?
Roughly,
to the Americas,
just a rough estimation.
Well, I'll just deal with the numbers that W.E.B. Dubois stated in his suppression of the illegal suppression of the Atlantic slave trade. And he said in between 50 to 100 million.
Oh, it's a ton. It's a ton.
Look, during the illegal slave trade, and I'm going to deal with this with some depth. During the illegal slave trade from 1808 to 1965, New York had 500 ships alone. New York alone had 500 ships a year going to Africa for the purpose of taking African people. And let's do an average. From 1808 into that's 50 years to the American Civil War, almost 50 years. And let's say that each ship had an average of 300 people. So you do 300 people times. This is just for New York alone. New York wasn't the only major slave docking port. You had New Orleans. You had South Carolina. You had Texas, Galveston, Texas, all parts of Texas. Wasn't the only one. You had places in Georgia. Well, let's just be modest. 300 people per ship. And that's a low number times 500 per year. That's 300 times 500. What is that? 15,000?
Sure. Sure. I'll take your word for it.
I'm just guessing, 15,000 from one place, but more than likely it was more like 25,000 a year.
Yeah.
Just from one state alone. New York wasn't the only state. Some estimates from 1808 onwards, I've seen estimates in the millions, and I've even seen numbers from a scholar by the name of Gerald Horn. When we'll get into this, he said more than 1 million just during the illegal period. I'm not talking about the period that the British controlled. I'm talking about the period in which it was illegal to do.
Right.
So I hope that answers some questions.
Yeah, no, I think so. I know we're getting right at about an hour and a half, and I do want to be mindful of your time. So
thank you. It is late here.
Yes, it is late. So I do appreciate again you coming on and sharing everything, guys. Definitely stay tuned for the conversation next week, where we're going to be going into just the history of the reparations movement. He'll be breaking that down. Also, be sure to sign up for the lecture happening May 3rd. If you have not already, there will be a ton of information, a ton of resources provided, only $10. So please do check it out. And do you have any other final thoughts before we want to sign off?
No, that's it. I just love for somebody's audience to come on and sign in. It costs a lot of money to do this type of research. Even in West Africa, we pay some of the highest internet access bills in the world. I mean, we pay about $200 a month to use 200 gigs of data a month. It's very expensive here.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's wild.
It's crazy. Just to use the internet, I pay almost $200 a month.
That's crazy.
And all you get is, so I'm using about 400 gigs a month, me and my children, my two children.
Wow.
There's no such thing as unlimited.
Not out, you said not out there, huh? That's crazy.
They're getting paid. They're getting paid.
Shout out to Kevin C with the 5 on the super chat. I see great information and discussion. We all need more study on the transatlantic slave trade. Definitely agree. And like I said, if you are interested in learning more, be sure to sign up for his lecture. We'll be dropping a lot of information in that I think you'll find interesting. So, yeah, well, again, thank you for calling in. I know it's late, so definitely go get some rest.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and you have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. So thanks for tuning in. That was a really informative discussion. Like I said, he provided a lot of different resources that you can go check out and read yourself and learn about. So definitely do so. If you missed that, don't worry. Just go back in the playback section. I'm going to add timestamps in a bit, so you can go directly to the timestamp and see some of the different sources he referenced. And if you haven't already, again, be sure to sign up for the lecture happening May 3rd. I'm going to briefly play just a little commercial regarding it for those of you who just hopped on.
Aboriginal people on this land were simply reclassified as black. So we've been here. This is our homeland.
The tens of millions of black Americans, or rather Indians, who disappeared in 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within America. Hundreds of thousands were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. The whole slave trade story was given to all of us in reverse.
People like Dane Calloway and Tariq Nasheed have great content, but their narrative is ahistorical and woefully misleading. They understand very little about our history.
All right, so be sure to check that out. It should be very interesting. So, guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Stay tuned for upcoming topics, content, lives, all the above. Thanks for the support. Like I said, guys, if you're on here, get those likes up before you leave. As always, you can show support to the show on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sade. And we'll talk later, guys. Peace.